At Harrison's gala, my place card read, "Useless housewife." His boss laughed, still leeching off him. Walking out, I hit send on a file to the section, "Enjoy the federal audit." I am Valerie. I am 34 years old, and on this particular Saturday evening, I was standing in front of my bedroom mirror, actively trying to figure out how to look completely invisible. It is a strange thing to desire invisibility, especially when you are wearing a floor-length emerald green gown that costs more than my first car. But that is exactly what my life had become. I was a corporate wife now, or at least, I was trying to play the part of one. I smoothed my hands down the silk fabric of the dress, feeling the cold material slip through my fingers. Harrison, my husband of 7 years, had specifically requested I wear this exact dress to the Reinhardt Tech annual gala. He said it made me look elegant, but not too flashy. Appropriate. That was his favorite word lately. Appropriate. I stared at my reflection and wondered where the real Valerie had gone. The woman looking back at me had carefully styled hair, neutral makeup, and tired eyes. She looked like a supporting character in someone else's movie. Just a few years ago, I was a forensic financial analyst. I was the woman who walked into boardrooms smelling of cheap coffee and confidence, carrying thick folders filled with evidence of corporate fraud. I used to track missing millions, analyze shady offshore accounts, and expose executives who thought they were smarter than everyone else. I was sharp, relentless, and widely respected in my field. But tonight, my biggest analytical challenge was trying to decide if my lipstick shade was too aggressive for a room full of tech executives. Behind me, the bathroom door opened. Harrison walked out, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored tuxedo. He was 35, tall, broad-shouldered, and radiated the kind of effortless charisma that made people want to hand him their money and their trust. He looked like a man who owned the world. I watched him in the mirror. He didn't look up to meet my eyes. He was intensely focused on his golden cufflinks, frowning slightly as he struggled with the clasp. We were sharing a bedroom, breathing the same air, preparing for the same event, but the distance between us felt like a massive, uncrossable ocean. We had become two polite strangers who happened to share a mortgage and a last name. The air in the room was heavy, suffocating. I wanted to turn around, grab him by the lapels of that expensive suit, and shake him. I wanted to ask him when he stopped seeing me. When did I stop being his equal and start becoming an accessory? But I swallowed the lump in my throat. I picked up my clutch purse, forced a soft, compliant smile onto my face, and prepared to step into the lion's den. I was terrified of this gala, and I didn't even fully understand why yet. To understand how a smart, fiercely independent woman ends up shrinking herself to fit into a husband's shadow, you have to go back to the beginning. The trap doesn't snap shut all at once. It is built slowly, piece by piece, usually masked as love and sacrifice. 10 years ago, the air was entirely different. We met in the dusty, quiet corners of our university library. I was a quiet, meticulous numbers girl, completely obsessed with the hidden stories buried inside corporate financial statements. Harrison was a business major who could barely balance his own checking account, but could sell water to a drowning man. I remember the exact moment he ruined my concentration. He was sitting at the next table, tapping his pen in this infuriating, rhythmic pattern while studying for a management exam. I finally snapped, marched over, and aggressively reorganized his messy notes just to make the tapping stop. He looked up at me with this brilliant, unapologetic smile. That was the beginning. We were entirely broke. We lived in a tiny, terrible apartment where the heater made a sound like a dying animal and the windows let in every winter breeze. Our diet consisted almost entirely of cheap chicken-flavored ramen noodles and whatever free pizza we could scavenge from campus events. But we were deeply, incredibly happy. We were a team. One rainy Tuesday night, sitting on the floor of that terrible apartment, we made a pact. Harrison held out his hand, looking at me with absolute sincerity. He promised that we would be a perfect partnership. He would bring the vision and the networking, and I would bring the logic, the strategy, and the grounding. No competition, no jealousy, just pure support. Business partners for life, he said. I shook his hand, believing every single word. And I lived up to that promise. I poured everything into his success. When he landed his first major interview at a startup, I stayed awake until 3 in the morning, grilling him on potential questions, researching the company's entire technology stack, and coaching him until his answers were flawless. I became the invisible backbone of his career. Meanwhile, I started my own boutique equity analysis firm right there on our scratched kitchen table. I worked crazy hours, printing out hundreds of pages of SEC filings. I was good at it. Once, I exposed a massive accounting fraud at a pharmaceutical company that ended up saving my clients $4 million. Back then, Harrison was so proud. He would brag about me at parties, calling me his brilliant corporate detective. He respected my brain. He valued my insight. I truly believed we were building a kingdom together, completely blind to the reality that I was only laying the bricks for his throne. The fundamental shift in our marriage did not happen overnight. It started 3 years ago with a bottle of expensive champagne. Harrison burst through the front door, practically vibrating with excitement. He had just been offered the position of Executive Strategy Director at Reinhardt Tech, one of the biggest technology firms in the country. The salary was staggering. The benefits were incredible. But there was a catch. The job was in Seattle. Moving across the country meant completely dismantling my consulting business. I had spent years building my local client base, earning their trust, establishing my reputation. Relocating meant starting over from absolute zero. But Harrison looked at me with those pleading, ambitious eyes. He told me this was our moment. He said that my business was flexible, that I could work from anywhere, while his opportunity was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. There is a concept in economics called the sunk cost fallacy. It is the tendency to follow through on an endeavor simply because you have already invested time, effort, or money into it, whether or not the current costs outweigh the benefits. I had invested 7 years into Harrison's potential. I was not going to stop now. So I smiled, packed my office into cardboard boxes, referred my loyal clients to my competitors, and boarded a flight to Seattle. That was my first fatal mistake. I convinced myself that my sacrifice was an investment in our shared future. But moving to Seattle changed the power dynamic permanently. I set up my new office in the spare bedroom of our oversized house. While Harrison was out shaking hands with tech billionaires and closing massive deals, I was sitting alone in a quiet room, trying to rebuild a business from scratch. My income dropped. My professional confidence took a hit. And Harrison changed. Slowly, subtly, his language shifted. When he talked about our financial future, the word "we" was replaced by "I." He would come home late, exhausted but wired, talking for hours about his strategic initiatives. But when I tried to share a victory from my day, a tricky stock analysis, a new client, his eyes would glaze over. He would offer a distracted nod, pat my hand, and change the subject back to his office politics. He started treating my career like a cute little hobby that kept me busy while he did the real work. The man who used to rely on my analytical mind now barely asked for my opinion on what we should have for dinner. I shrank myself to make room for his expanding ego, telling myself it was only temporary. But the truth was, the foundation of our marriage was turning to sand, and the tide was about to wash it all away. If our marriage was already weakening, the arrival of Penelope Blackwood was the earthquake that finally shattered it. Penelope was hired as the new senior vice president of corporate strategy at Reinhardt Tech, making her Harrison's direct supervisor. I didn't meet her for the first 18 months she worked there, but she moved into our house like an invisible, suffocating ghost. It started with a name-dropping. Suddenly, every dinner conversation, every weekend drive, every casual chat was infected with her name. Penelope thinks the market is shifting. Penelope's vision for the new quarter is revolutionary. Penelope says we need to pivot our integration strategy. It was relentless. He spoke about her with a mixture of absolute reverence and desperate eagerness to please. At first, I tried to be the supportive wife. I suggested we invite her over for dinner, thinking it would be good to meet the woman mentoring my husband. But Harrison shot the idea down immediately. He claimed she was far too busy with high-level executive meetings and industry conferences to bother with a casual home dinner. He made it sound like inviting her into our home would be an insult to her incredibly important schedule. The true danger of Penelope, however, wasn't just his admiration for her. It was how he used her to completely invalidate my existence. One evening, sitting across from each other at the dining table, I tried to have a serious discussion about the tech sector. I had spent the week analyzing quarterly reports, and I was deeply concerned. I told Harrison that the debt-to-equity ratios across his industry were showing massive red flags, signaling a potential market correction. I was speaking as a financial expert, offering a professional warning. Harrison barely looked up from his smartphone. He took a sip of water, sighed impatiently, and said, "While Penelope thinks the current market fundamentals are stronger than they appear. She says people who focus too much on traditional metrics miss the bigger innovation picture." I stared at him, my blood running cold. I reminded him that Penelope was a corporate strategist, not a forensic financial analyst. This was literally my area of expertise. His response was a verbal slap to the face. He leaned back, gave me a condescending smile, and said, "Penelope has a top-tier MBA and 15 years of corporate strategy experience. The complexities are different at this level, Valerie. It is not exactly the same as your little work-from-home consulting gigs." Right there, at our own dinner table, my husband of 7 years took my entire career, my education, my track record of saving millions, and crushed it into dust, simply because another woman told him to look at the bigger picture. Penelope had not just become his boss, she had become his absolute authority on reality. And in Penelope's reality, I was nothing. Penelope's manipulation was not loud. It was surgical. She didn't attack me directly. She used Harrison as a weapon against me, wrapping her insults in a thick layer of fake corporate politeness. This became glaringly obvious through her text messages. She got my phone number from Harrison under the guise of wanting to keep in touch with the families of her core team. What followed was a masterclass in passive-aggressive psychological warfare. The messages always arrived on holidays, meticulously timed. On Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed. The text read, "Happy Thanksgiving, Valerie. So grateful to have Harrison working so hard on our exciting new developments. Hope you are enjoying your quaint little projects at home." I stared at the screen, reading the word quaint over and over again. It was a perfectly chosen adjective designed to make me feel small. It reduced my complex financial modeling to the equivalent of knitting sweaters for stray cats. On Valentine's Day, while Harrison was working late at the office, she sent another, "Hope you and Harrison have a lovely evening whenever he finally gets out of here. He is so dedicated to excellence. You are so adaptable and understanding to just wait around for him." Every single message was structured the exact same way. Praise Harrison's immense importance, highlight the massive, exciting world they shared at the office, and then pat me on the head for being a patient, simple, domestic little creature waiting by the door. I showed the messages to Harrison. I pointed out the condescending tone. I explained how insulting it was for his boss to refer to my professional career as little projects. I was looking for my partner to defend me. I was hoping he would see the blatant disrespect. Instead, Harrison looked at me like I was losing my mind. He let out a heavy, frustrated sigh, the kind you give a difficult child. "Valerie, you are being completely oversensitive," he said, tossing my phone back onto the counter. "Penelope is just being friendly. She goes out of her way to include spouses in her communications. You are reading way too much into this because you're stuck in the house all day. Stop trying to create drama where there isn't any. That is how gaslighting works. It makes you question your own sanity. You know what you read. You know the sting of the insult. But the person you trust most in the world looks you dead in the eye and tells you that the sky is green and the pain isn't real." He was protecting Penelope's intentions while completely invalidating my feelings. He made me feel crazy, jealous, and small. And the worst part was, for a few months, I actually started to believe him. The final stage of Penelope's campaign was strategic isolation. She was systematically erasing me from Harrison's professional life. Corporate dinners, networking events, weekend retreats. Suddenly, there was always a reason why spouses were not invited, or why I specifically shouldn't attend. Harrison would come home and casually mention how Sarah, the marketing director, brought her husband to a casual drinks night, or how David from sales brought his wife to the charity drive. But when I asked why I wasn't told about these events, Harrison would stumble over his words. Penelope said it was a last-minute thing. Penelope thought you would be bored. Penelope knows how busy you are with your home office. I was being walled off. Penelope was building a fortress around my husband, and she was leaving me on the outside. But I didn't truly understand the full, terrifying scope of her plan until one Tuesday afternoon in early October. I was walking down the hallway toward the kitchen to grab a cup of coffee. The door to Harrison's home office was cracked open about an inch. He was working from home that day, taking a call on speakerphone. As I walked past, I heard Penelope's voice echoing out into the hallway. It was crisp, authoritative, and chillingly calm. "You have massive potential, Harrison," Penelope was saying. "I see you stepping into senior leadership by next year. But to operate at that level, you need to surround yourself with people who understand true corporate ambition. People who match your drive." There was a pause. I froze in the hallway, holding my breath. "Valerie is very supportive," Harrison replied. But his voice was weak. It lacked any real conviction. He sounded like a man defending a broken appliance he hadn't gotten around to throwing out yet. Penelope let out a soft, dismissive laugh. It sounded like ice cracking. "Support is fine for a junior manager, Harrison. But true partnership is different. You need someone who can elevate your thinking, challenge your assumptions, and navigate these high-level social waters. Valerie is, well, she is very sweet. She is safe. But you need someone who operates at your level." I stood paralyzed on the hardwood floor. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break my ribs. I waited for Harrison to explode. I waited for him to raise his voice, to tell his boss that she had crossed a massive line, to defend my intelligence, my career, my worth. I waited for the man who promised me a perfect partnership in that university library to show up and fight for me. The silence from his end of the phone stretched out for 10 agonizing seconds. And then my husband, the man I had given my entire 20s to, softly replied, "I understand what you mean, Penelope. You make a good point." I didn't scream. I didn't kick the door open. I turned around, walked silently back into my bedroom, and sat on the edge of the bed. The illusion was dead. Penelope wasn't just a toxic boss. She was a predator conducting a hostile takeover of my marriage. And Harrison was holding the door open for her. That afternoon, I went to my desk, pulled out a fresh, black notebook, and began writing down everything. Every date, every text message, every canceled event. If they wanted to play a corporate game, they were about to learn that they had invited a master analyst to the table. If you are enjoying the story so far, please take a second to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling me the name of the city you are living in right now. Every single comment helps this video reach more people who need to hear it. Thank you so much. Now, let's get back to the story. The week leading up to the Reinhardt Tech annual gala felt like walking through a funhouse mirror. After months of being systematically excluded from every corporate dinner, weekend retreat, and networking event, Harrison burst through our front door on a Tuesday evening with a manic, uncharacteristic energy. He tossed his leather briefcase onto the couch, loosened his expensive silk tie, and announced that Penelope had specifically insisted I attend the gala that Saturday. I looked up from my laptop, where I had been casually reviewing a quarterly report for an old client, and stared at him. I asked him to repeat himself. He smiled, but the smile did not quite reach his eyes. He said Penelope had pulled him aside after an executive strategy meeting and told him it was time his wife experienced the full Reinhardt culture. He was practically glowing with a nervous, desperate kind of pride. He told me this was a huge moment, that the gala was where they announced major promotions, and that Penelope would not have suggested I attend unless something massive was coming for his career. Every single analytical instinct I possessed screamed that this was a trap. After 18 months of treating me like an inconvenient ghost, Penelope suddenly wanted me in the room for the most important social event of the year? It defied all logic. But human emotion is a dangerous, illogical thing. Despite the red flags waving violently in my face, a tiny, pathetic part of me allowed itself to hope. I was so exhausted from the silent war in my house. I wanted to believe that maybe Penelope had realized excluding me was counterproductive. I wanted to believe this was an olive branch. So, I threw myself into preparation. I did not just buy the emerald green dress Harrison requested. I spent 3 days meticulously researching current tech industry trends. I memorized the details of Reinhardt Tech's recent acquisitions. I studied their new blockchain integration project until I could debate its merits with their lead developers. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, practicing my talking points, adjusting my posture, preparing to show Harrison and his boss that I was not just a supportive spouse waiting at home. I was an intelligent, capable partner with valuable insights. I was ready to step back into the light. I had no idea I was dressing up for my own public execution. The Crestmore Hotel was a monument to corporate excess. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden light across imported marble floors, and servers in crisp white uniforms carried silver trays of champagne flutes through crowds of elegantly dressed executives. Walking through the grand lobby in my emerald dress, my hair perfectly styled, I felt a flicker of my old confidence return. I felt prepared. I felt like Valerie the analyst, not Valerie the forgotten wife. But the very second we crossed the threshold into the main ballroom, the atmosphere violently shifted. I felt Harrison's hand on the small of my back, but it did not feel supportive. It felt tense. Performative. Like he was playing a role for an audience. His eyes immediately darted across the massive room, scanning the crowd until they locked onto his target. His posture changed instantly from relaxed to painfully alert. Penelope Blackwood approached us like a queen descending upon her subjects. She was wearing a custom-tailored silver gown that caught the light of the chandeliers with every calculated step. She looked sharp, expensive, and incredibly dangerous. Her smile was blindingly bright, visible from 50 feet away, but her eyes were cold and assessing. She reached out and grasped my hand. Her voice carried just enough volume to ensure that the 3 closest groups of executives stopped their conversations to listen. She said, "Valerie, you actually came." I felt a chill run down my spine. The emphasis she placed on the word "actually" was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. It was designed to sound delighted, while simultaneously implying to everyone listening that my attendance was unexpected, unusual, and perhaps even a little desperate. I kept my voice perfectly level, thanked her for the invitation, and offered a polite smile. Penelope did not miss a beat. She looked at Harrison, then back to me, and said, "Well, Harrison certainly deserves to have his +1 here for such a special evening." +1. 2 words, delivered with surgical precision, stripping away my identity, my marriage, and my history with the man standing next to me. I was not his wife. I was not his partner. I was an accessory he was allowed to bring for the night. I felt Harrison's hand tighten slightly on my back, but he said absolutely nothing to correct her. He just offered a weak, accommodating laugh. Penelope took the lead, guiding us through the crowded ballroom toward the dining area. She moved with absolute authority. We approached an elegantly decorated round table near the center of the room. She turned to Harrison, touched his arm lightly, and told him his seat was right next to hers at the leadership table at the front of the room. My stomach dropped into freefall. I looked at Harrison, waiting for him to object. Spouses always sat together at these functions. But Penelope quickly explained, in a tone that suggested I was incredibly naive for not knowing, that executives sit at the head table, while spouses have their own separate seating arrangements. She gestured vaguely to a table near the back, near the kitchen doors, telling me my place card would be over there. Harrison did not even look back at me. He simply nodded, adjusted his jacket, and followed Penelope toward the stage, leaving me standing alone in a sea of strangers. The walk to my assigned table felt like wading through wet cement. I approached a table surrounded by junior marketing coordinators and regional sales assistants, people several tiers below Harrison's executive status. They were already settling into their chairs, chatting and sipping their drinks. I walked slowly around the perimeter, reading the elegant, cream-colored place cards written in beautiful, deep blue calligraphy. Sarah, Executive Assistant. Michael, Regional Sales. Jessica, Marketing Coordinator. And then I found my seat. The card was made of the exact same heavy, expensive cardstock. The calligraphy was identical. But instead of the name Valerie, the elegant blue ink read, Useless Housewife. The words hit my brain with the physical force of a car crash. I stopped breathing. I stared at the card, my mind desperately trying to process what my eyes were seeing. The sheer, terrifying reality of the situation washed over me. This was not a quick, angry insult yelled in the heat of an argument. This was premeditated. Someone had to type those words into a spreadsheet. Someone had to send that spreadsheet to a professional calligrapher. Someone had to pay for it, inspect it, and intentionally place it exactly where I would find it. Penelope had planned my humiliation weeks in advance. The laughter started as a low murmur and quickly built into a wave. The junior executives at my table had noticed the card. I heard a woman behind me whisper, "Oh my God, look at her card. Is she really still leeching off him?" A man across the table let out a sharp, cruel snort of laughter. Within 30 seconds, half the ballroom was either staring at me, whispering behind their hands, or actively laughing at my expense. I turned my head toward the head table at the front of the room. I sought out my husband. The man I had starved with, built with, loved with every fiber of my being. I gave him one last, desperate chance to be a man. To stand up, to throw his napkin on the table, to walk over and defend me. Harrison was staring intently at his crystal water glass. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. He knew. He had known this was going to happen, and he chose to sit there in silence. His cowardice was absolute. Something broke inside me in that exact second. But it was not my spirit. It was the chains of my marriage. The Valerie who worried about lipstick and being appropriate evaporated. I picked up my clutch purse, turned my back on my husband, and began walking toward the grand exit doors with my head held high. As I passed the executive table, I locked eyes with the female chief executive officer of Reinhardt Tech. She was leaning back in her chair, a mild, amused smirk on her face, clearly enjoying Penelope's little prank. I stopped walking. I leaned down, bringing my lips just inches from her ear, and whispered, "I would check your stock prices on Monday morning if I were you." I did not wait to see her reaction. I walked out of the Cressmore Hotel, stepped into the cool night air, and got into a taxi. The taxi driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror as we drove through the dark city streets. He probably expected the woman in the expensive evening gown to break down sobbing. But my tears had dried before we even left the hotel parking lot. I did not feel sad. I did not feel humiliated anymore. I felt an intense, terrifying clarity. The house was completely silent when I unlocked the front door. It felt alien to me now. It was not a home. It was just a building where I used to live. I kicked off my high heels, walked straight past the bedroom, and went directly into my home office. I sat down at my desk and pressed the power button on my workstation. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh blue light across my face. It was time to go to work. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for only a second before muscle memory took over completely. I began typing in passwords and accessing databases I had maintained but barely utilized in 3 years. I opened my Bloomberg terminal. I logged into the Securities and Exchange Commission's Edgar database, pulling up every single piece of public financial documentation related to Reinhardt Tech. The subscriptions I had kept active, the ones Harrison had called a waste of money, were about to become the most lethal weapons in my arsenal. I felt the familiar, intoxicating rush of adrenaline flood my system. This was my domain. For 18 months, Penelope Blackwood had controlled the narrative. She had fought me in the realm of office politics, whispers, and social manipulation. But tonight, she had invited an apex predator into the world of numbers. And numbers do not care about your expensive silver dress or your manipulative charisma. Numbers leave a trail. Numbers always tell the truth. I started with their most recent quarterly earnings reports, cross-referencing them against executive compensation schedules and public announcements. I was looking for the pulse of the company, the hidden rhythm beneath the polished corporate lies. I cracked my knuckles, took a sip of cold water, and whispered to the empty room, "Let us see exactly what you have been hiding, Penelope." Forensic accounting is not about looking at the big, bold numbers at the bottom of a page. It is about reading the footnotes. It is about finding the spaces between the numbers, the money that shifts quietly in the dark. It took me less than 3 hours to find the first major irregularity. By 4 in the morning, I had uncovered a massive, systemic pattern of corporate fraud, and Penelope's fingerprints were smeared all over it. Penelope was arrogant. She believed that because she was smarter than Harrison, she was smarter than everyone else. That arrogance made her incredibly sloppy. She had been orchestrating a classic revenue manipulation scheme, and she was doing it right out in the open, disguised as aggressive corporate strategy. Here is exactly how she did it. Reinhardt Tech had several massive research and development projects. These projects cost tens of millions of dollars. Normally, those expenses would drag down the company's quarterly profits, making the stock look weak to investors. But Penelope had been quietly shifting those massive expenses off the main company books and hiding them inside smaller, obscure offshore subsidiaries just days before the end of each financial quarter. By hiding the expenses, she artificially inflated Reinhardt Tech's profit margins. The company looked incredibly profitable on paper. Wall Street analysts would cheer, investors would buy in, and the stock price would artificially surge. But the timing was the most damning part. I laid out a timeline, mapping the dates of these accounting tricks against the executive stock option vesting schedules. It was a perfect, illegal match. Penelope was inflating the company's value right before her own massive stock options became available to sell. She was creating fake wealth, cashing out her bonuses, and leaving the investors holding an empty bag. It was deliberate, calculated securities fraud. And the absolute best part? She had signed off on the internal authorizations herself. I found the public filings. Her signature was right there, approving the shifting of funds, trapped in black and white ink. She had built her entire career projecting invincibility, but she had left a paper trail so wide a first-year accounting student could have driven a truck through it. I compiled the spreadsheets. I highlighted the discrepancies. I built a bulletproof, 50-page dossier of absolute financial ruin. The sun was beginning to rise over Seattle, painting my office walls in pale morning light. I had my weapon. Now, I just needed to pull the trigger. Taking down a multi-billion-dollar tech firm requires precision. You cannot just call the police. You have to start a fire so bright that the regulators have no choice but to look. At exactly 6 in the morning on Wednesday, I logged onto the internet's most influential, high-stakes investment forum. I used a secure, encrypted connection and created an anonymous profile under the name Equity Watchdog 47. I did not write an angry rant. I wrote a cold, deeply analytical expose titled, "Red Flags at Reinhardt Tech, a deep dive into concerning financial patterns." I uploaded the charts showing the exact correlation between the hidden expenses and Penelope's stock sales. I provided precise citations to regulatory guidelines, proving the illegality of the moves. I laid the math out so simply that any mid-level investor could instantly see the fraud. I hit the publish button, leaned back in my chair, and waited. The internet is a volatile machine. By noon, my analysis had been shared across 4 major financial blogs. By 3 in the afternoon, my encrypted email inbox received a notification. It was a message from an anonymous internal server at Reinhardt Tech. The subject line read, "A concerned insider." I opened the email. A junior accountant inside Penelope's own department had read my post. They had been terrified to speak up, but my analysis gave them the courage they needed. Attached to the email were highly confidential internal Slack channel screenshots. They were devastating. There were messages from Penelope explicitly ordering the accounting team to delay recording expenses. But the final screenshot in the folder was not about money. It was a chat log from Saturday night, time-stamped at 11:47, just an hour after I had left the gala. Penelope had posted in the executive channel, "Did you all see Valerie's face when she read her place card? Priceless." Directly beneath it, Harrison had replied, She needed to understand her place. Mission accomplished. I stared at Harrison's words. Any lingering shred of pity I had for my husband evaporated into thin air. I downloaded all the screenshots, added them to my massive dossier, and sent the entire package directly to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Then I made one final move. I forwarded the entire file to Donovan Reyes, a senior investigative journalist at the Wall Street Journal, someone I had worked with years ago who owed me a favor. I closed my laptop. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the jaws were about to snap shut. The following Monday afternoon, the financial world exploded. The Wall Street Journal published Donovan's front page expose just before the market opened. The headline was merciless. It detailed everything I had uncovered, explicitly naming Penelope Blackwood as the architect of a massive corporate fraud scheme. By 10 in the morning, Reinhardt Tech's stock price went into an absolute freefall, dropping 18% in a single hour. Trading was halted twice to prevent a total market panic. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I heard a key frantically turning in the front door lock. Harrison stumbled into the house 3 hours earlier than usual. His heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway. He appeared in the doorway of my office, and he looked like he had aged 10 years in a single weekend. His custom suit was wrinkled, his tie was pulled loose, and he was sweating through his expensive shirt. He collapsed into the chair across from my desk. He looked at me with wild, desperate eyes. "Valerie, we need to talk," he stammered, his voice cracking. "The FBI is at the office. They seized Penelope's hard drives. The SEC is launching a full federal investigation. It is bad. It is a total disaster." I did not close my laptop. I just looked at him, keeping my face entirely blank. "That sounds incredibly complicated," I said softly. He leaned forward, placing his hands flat on my desk. "I need your help. I need your analytical expertise. You are the smartest person I know when it comes to financial investigations. Penelope is falling apart. She is blaming everyone, and I signed some of those strategy documents. I could be implicated. Please, Valerie. We are a team. I need you to look at my files and tell me how to defend myself." The absolute audacity of this man took my breath away. The husband who had mocked my career, the man who had let another woman call me a useless housewife, was now begging on his knees for my brain to save him from federal prison. I slowly reached into my desk drawer. I pulled out a thick manila folder and slid it across the polished wood until it rested against his trembling hands. Harrison looked down at it, confused. "What is this? Legal strategies?" "No, Harrison," I said, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. "That is my exit strategy." He opened the folder. Inside were the finalized divorce papers, completely filled out, just waiting for his signature. Beneath them was a copy of the Wall Street Journal article. "You wanted a wife who operates at your level," I told him, watching the color completely drain from his face. "But the truth is, you never even came close to operating at mine. I am Equity Watchdog 47. I wrote the report. I sent the files to the SEC. I burned Penelope's empire to the ground, and I made absolutely sure you were standing right in the middle of the flames." I stood up, picked up my suitcase from the corner of the room, and walked out the front door without looking back. 6 months is a long time in the financial world. It is enough time for an empire to fall, and enough time to build a new one. The federal indictment against Penelope Blackwood was handed down in late October. The news networks ran footage of her walking out of the federal courthouse. The arrogant, untouchable executive who wore silver gowns and humiliated women for sport was gone. She was wearing cheap flat shoes, her shoulders hunched, trying to hide her face from the flashing cameras behind a manila envelope. She was facing multiple counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. She was looking at a decade behind bars. Harrison lost everything. Reinhardt Tech fired him with cause, stripping him of his unvested stock options and his massive salary. His reputation was entirely radioactive. No major tech firm in the country would even grant him an interview, terrified of the toxic association with Penelope's fraudulent regime. The man who had abandoned his wife to climb the corporate ladder found himself standing at the very bottom, completely alone. As for me, exposing the Reinhardt fraud was the ultimate resume builder. A week after I left Harrison, my phone rang. It was Sylvia Croft, the ruthless and brilliant CEO of one of the most prestigious hedge funds in the city. She did not ask for an interview. She asked for my price. Today, my business cards read, Valerie, Director of Equity Research. My starting salary was 3 times what Harrison used to make at his peak. I work in a corner office with glass walls, surrounded by professionals who lean in and take notes when I speak. My analysis dictates investment strategies worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I am not a +1. I am not a project. I am the final word. Last night, I stood on the balcony of my new, high-rise penthouse apartment. The city lights stretched out beneath me like a carpet of diamonds. The air was quiet, peaceful, and entirely mine. I held a glass of expensive red wine in one hand and a heavy, cream-colored envelope in the other. It was a package from Harrison's desperately cheap divorce attorney. Inside was the final, signed divorce decree, officially ending our 10-year history. But attached to the legal documents was a handwritten letter from Harrison. The ink was slightly smudged, as if he had been crying when he wrote it. The letter was pathetic. He wrote that he had lost everything, that his life was a waking nightmare, and that he finally realized I was the only real, valuable thing he had ever had. He begged me, with pleading words covering 2 full pages, for just 15 minutes of my time. He wanted to buy me a cup of coffee. He said he was a completely broken man who just wanted the chance to look me in the eyes and apologize properly for failing me. I stood there in the cold night air, staring at his messy handwriting, listening to the distant hum of the city traffic below. Part of me knows exactly what the smartest, most ruthless move is. The ultimate revenge is silence. Tearing up the letter, blocking his number, and leaving him on read for the rest of his miserable, ruined life. Letting him fade into absolute nothingness while I continue to rise. But another, darker part of me is tempted. I want to put on my most expensive, custom-tailored power suit. I want to walk into that coffee shop, sit across from him, drink a $10 espresso, and watch him squirm. I want to watch the man who laughed at me while I was humiliated in front of hundreds of people look me in the eye and admit his exact failures out loud. I want to see the regret physically break him. Tell me, what would you do? Should I give him those 15 minutes to grovel and beg for a forgiveness he will never receive? Or should I drop this letter in the trash and let him drown in the exact same cold, humiliating silence he gave me at the gala? Am I wrong for wanting to see him suffer just a little bit more? Thank you for watching until the very end. If you believe that a woman's intelligence should never be underestimated, hit that subscribe button right now. Do not forget to ring the bell so you never miss a story of justice, revenge, and taking back control. Leave your advice for me in the comments below. See you in the next one.